everyone, welcome back to our last session of this very stimulating conference. We start this session entitled Cultural Identities in Religious Architecture Through Time. And I would like to welcome Dr. Manfred Luchterhand from the University of Göttingen. And he will present a topic entitled Synagogue, Church, and Mosque in the Post-Antique Mediterranean, the Formation and Differentiation of Religious Identities. Please welcome Dr. Manfred.
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. After so much discussions on modern architecture, it's a bit strange for me to take back this discussion to its historical roots in the 7th and 8th century. Nevertheless, I hope you will profit from some aspects and insights. In the history of encounters between cultures and religions, which is a subject of this conference, one often faces a problem that heats up tempers even beyond the world of science. Is there balance in this exchange between cultures, or do we mostly have to deal with asymmetries that are reflected in words such as influence, role model, adoption, or appropriation, in a cultural flow of ideas and innovations based on dominance and imbalance? The quotations here from recent research on the early history of the Islamic mosque shown here demonstrate the full extent of the contradictions involved. When in the 7th century, Muhammad's generals from the Quraysh tribe conquered the Middle East, Persia and North Africa, they built an empire in just 2 generations, combining the territorial expansions with the spread of a new monotheistic faith. In doing so, they established what the historian Garth Foden defined in '93 as imperial monotheism, a new variant of the older idea of a Christian Roman Empire, and thus a typical phenomenon of late antiquity. But this new empire, founded by the relatives and followers of Muhammad, was, as Jack Tarnouz has shown in his wonderful award-winning book, The Making of the Medieval Middle East, a far more fragile structure than it appears at first glance. Not only did the Arab conquerors remain an ethnic and religious minority for many centuries, they also ruled over a multitude of religious groups with a historical experience, an intellectual culture, and an architectural heritage that Muslims did not yet have at that time. As the 9th century writer Al-Jajiz almost jealously admitted, the Muslims in this empire may have been the political rulers, but the mothers of their caliphs had often been Christians, and this was still true of their top officials, their doctors and aristocrats, whose prosperity, education, and elegant style Al-Jajiz admires with envy. Frustrated, he tells the story of a Muslim doctor who could not find a job in late antique Syria for a long time because the people always preferred Christian doctors to him. The deep reverence that Islamic scholars felt for the subjugated Christians and Jews and their older faith is exemplified by the assessment of the sacred buildings of the time in the Middle East as a symbol of power, but also of cultural superiority. The famous Jerusalem geographer Al-Muqaddasi, whose father was himself an architect, reported a conversation with his uncle on the question of whether it was wise of Caliph al-Walid to build a mosque as large as the one in Damascus, or whether it would better have been to invest the money in better urban planning, or as we would say today, infrastructure. but the uncle objected. Here you see the citation. Said he, "You simply not understand, my dear son. Al-Walid was absolutely right, and it was open to him to do a worthy work. For he saw that Syria was a country settled by the Christians, and he noted there their churches so handsome with their enchanting decorations, renowned far and wider, such as the Kumana, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the churches of Lydda and Edessa. So he undertook for the Muslims the building of a mosque that would divert their attention from the churches and make it one of the wonders of the world. Do you not realize how Abd al-Malik, seeing the greatness of the dome of the Kumana and its splendors, fearing lest it should beguile the hearts of the Muslims, hence erected above the rock the dome you could now see there? At first glance, this expectation of a magnificent sacred building seems almost naive, but it was by no means so. For at least since the research of Oleg Grabar, we know that the famous Dome of the Rock of the Caliph Abd al-Malik on the Temple Mount, which was probably modeled on the late antique Katisma Church near Bethlehem, also a rock sanctuary, originally had no clearly defined function, but was merely aimed at the Islamic appropriation of a place with a highly charged religious significance. The legends that connect it to Muhammad mostly come from the later Fadail, the local city guides of the 10th and 11th centuries. Al-Muqaddisi's statement is in so far interesting in that he emphasizes not so much the religious and political significance of the Caliph's religious building projects in Jerusalem and Damascus as their culturally agonal character, as monuments whose size and splendor, regardless of their function and meaning, were designed to impress contemporary viewers and convince them of a new face. This need for religious cultural equality was justified in that Syria and Palestine were among the most innovative centers of late antique church building. In particular, the famous Cathedral of Edessa, a monumental central building from the time of Justinian, which we only know from descriptions, was celebrated as a wonder of the world even by Arab authors. As early as 679, the Caliph Muawiyah, who was the first to move his residence to Damascus, had the famous Syrian church renovated after an earthquake. A little later, the wealthy Christian Athanasius, political advisor to the Caliph Abd al-Malik, was given permission to build a new baptistry next to the cathedral for the famous Mandylion, although the religious laws did not provide for this. Is this claim of the new Islamic elites to equality with the cultural heritage of Oriental Christianity also reflected in their building projects? I think so, and this on the basis of a phenomenon that Jack Tanous characterizes as anxiety of influence, as a constant worry of the Muslim elites that the proximity of the three monotheistic religions was seen as a dangerous challenge, which made the distinction in everyday life even more important. If Jews chose Saturday as their day of rest and Christians Sunday, Muslims had to choose Friday. If the Jews called to prayer with a horn and the Christians with a wooden nakus, Muslims had to choose the call to prayer. Even in matters of fasting, clothing, food, tableware, or walking, the difference was deliberately sought, following the hadith, "Do not imitate Jews and Christians." In particular, there where Jews and Christians had been the majority, as for example in Syria, even the Shahada, the Islamic creed was expanded by one sentence to make the distinction even clearer. Next point, challenging and defining boundaries. In fact, the complex relationship between mosque and church in the early days of Islam cannot be understood without this close interweaving of proximity and the need for demarcation. The first fully preserved mosque in Damascus, 80 years after the emergence after the emergence of the Islam as new religious community, not only became the founding building and successful model for a whole generation of mosque buildings from Iraq to Islamic Spain. For all its modernity, it remained at the same time a deeply late antique architecture, which at the same time had at its disposal the entire repertoire of Christian architecture of the time, and at the same time transformed it comprehensively. It was so ambivalent, precisely from the point of view of an outsider, that a visitor from afar, such as Tang China, would hardly have recognized the difference to a regular church. This ambivalence was a typical phenomenon of many Jewish, Christians, or Muslim places of assembly. Even the synagogues of late antiquity were often barely distinguishable from church interiors, while Muslims, for their part, had little problems continuing to use synagogues without altering or changing them. A large part of this functional ambiguity was also due to the rapid religious dynamics of the 6th and 7th centuries, in which the balance of power between the three confessions changed repeatedly. In fact, the early stages of the Islamic mosque as a new building type can be described much more precisely today than a few decades ago, when the image of a primarily independent Islamic genesis of the mosque still prevailed. As Mattia Guidotti has convincingly shown, in the 7th and 8th centuries, Muslims often still prayed in the main churches of the cities they had conquered. Or they set up a prayer room near them. For example, in Aleppo, Homs, Damascus, here in Mesopotamia, Martyropolis, and other cities like as Damascus, where the Muslims initially used the southern wall of the ancient temple complex as the Qibla or prayer hall, while the Christians continued to worship in St. John's Church, which must be located in the temple area. We didn't know very much about this church. This frequent contiguity of church and mosque seems to have been motivated not only by practical considerations, but also by the desire to establish the new ruling elite in the city center and to make the new mosques the nucleus of an Arab quarter with shops and bazaars. In fact, not only in Damascus were government buildings often directly connected to the main mosque, as you see it on this reconstruction. Furthermore, this proximity of church and mosque also seems to have promoted the coexistence of old and new elites, especially when the increasing conversions caused rifts within the same Christian families. We know from the Syrian vita of Theodotus of Amida, today Diyarbakir, that Muslims also listened to the saint's sermons and followed his instructions. The choice of words in this case indicates that many of these Muslims were converted, who were still familiar with Christian rites. Examples of Muslim elites who were open to the Christian tradition include Muawiyah, the Caliph, who is said to have prayed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and in Gethsemane at the beginning of his caliphate. But also those Muslims who around 700 added a mihrab to the Church of St. Mary near Bethlehem, pointing towards Mecca. Also in the church, Nativity Church of Bethlehem, the South Apse was used for Muslim prayer. Further evidence that Muslims shared the use of churches could, according to a much-cited assumption by Michele Piccirillo, also be the iconoclastic interventions that can be seen in a lot of floor mosaics in Jordan between about 720 and 760. Here images were not destroyed, but only intentionally defaced by the relocation of the tesserae. Since this affected not only humans but also animals, whose depiction was not controversial in Christianity, there's much to suggest either a conscious consideration for that Muslim minority who also sought out church buildings for their prayer, or a temporary use of the church as mosque. With the destruction of the church, here you see the relocating of the old tesserae. With the destruction of the church of St. John in Damascus and the construction of the great Umayyad Mosque, the oldest fully preserved mosque in the world, the new young Caliph al-Walid broke with a decade-long coexistence of Christians and Muslims in favor of a powerful demonstration of political strength and superiority in the first year of his reign. But this act of religious violence must also have been highly controversial in Damascus, which at the time was probably still predominantly Christian. This is evidenced not only by the 3 panegyrics that the Caliph had written to justify his actions, recently published by George, but also by a long legal dispute with the representatives of the Christian community who had refused to sell their church to the Caliph. This conflict continued to have an effect on later rulers. When Walid's younger brother Hisham came to power in 724, he returned to the more Christian-friendly policies of his father Abd al-Malik. A lover of great desert castles and bathhouses, Hisham built 2 palaces near the famous Sergius sanctuary at Rizafa, as well as a large mosque on the north side of the pilgrimage church, from which believers could access to the tomb of the saint through a small door. You see this mosque here on the left. This is the basilica in the state today. Dorothee Sack, who excavated this site, interprets Hisham's approach as an attempt to consciously avoid the religious conflicts that had broken up in Damascus. Both share the reverence for the same saint, who was also popular among the rural Arab population, but this time on the basis of a formalized connection between church and mosque. Both confessions are aware of their common heritage, albeit on the basis of a sharpened identity that is expressed not only in practices but also in architectural structures. Third point, the mosque in the shadow of the church. This brings me back to the introductory question regarding the asymmetry of cultural exchange. The fact that the Islamic conquest of the Christian, Jewish, and Sassanid East created a cultural area in which Islamic places of worship now dominated the cityscape was certainly due to the economic restrictions and building prohibitions that Christians were confronted with for many generations. Nevertheless, this picture was by no means uniform. Many of the great late antique church buildings in Antioch, Edessa, Ctesiphon, or Jerusalem often survived until the turn of the first millennium and remained vital centers of pilgrimage before they fell into disrepair or were destroyed by Muslim zealots like Al-Hakim. In quantitative terms, the cultural heritage of the East remained dominated by the monumental heritage of late antique Christianity for a long time, in some cases until the period of the Mongol invasions. This raises the questions of the extent to which the early Islamic mosque can be regarded as a genuine creation of an Arab founding community, or rather as a late antique reinvention of a building type that only gained its profile in confrontation with Jewish and Christian practices. In addressing the question of transformation versus the paradigm of origin and evolution, I'm referring here to the research of Angela Neuwirth, her Quran studies, and Jeremy Johns, who tend to favor the transformation thesis and late antiquity as a discursive space. As Jeremy Johns has demonstrated, the early Muslim community in Mecca probably did not yet have a mosque as a building. The much later reports about the so-called House of the Prophet, an open place of prayer in front of the Qibla, partly covered with palm wood, with which Creswell and Robert Hillenbrand begin their architectural histories, are probably later myths of origin, shaped by the symbolism of the Jewish temple. They only emerged at a time when little was known about the situation in the years around 620. The first reliable descriptions and archaeological remains in Kufa, today Iraq, already refer to the time of the conquest, around 640 to 660, and point to an architecture that is strongly influenced by the architecture of late antiquity and the Sassanid Empire, and whose castle-like character probably goes back to the fact that most of these mosques were built in newly founded garrison towns. If there was an ideal plane, then the caliphs Umar, Uthman, or Muawiyah must have been the authors. Core elements are a wall that defines the direction of prayer, as well as a prayer hall. In front of it, the Zola with a forecourt whose transverse orientation takes into account the parallel positioning of the worshippers in a row. The mihrab, the semicircular prayer niche in the Qibla, was not documented until around 700, making it the latest element of the mosque. Significantly, this mihrab is also the element of the mosque that most strongly resembles the tradition of Jewish and Christian prayer rooms. Thus, around 700, one could see such prayer niches connected to a transept, not only in the synagogue of Eshtemor, you see here, south of Jerusalem. They can also be found in the late antique monasteries of Mesopotamia and especially Egypt, particularly where rooms were not used for the altar liturgy, but for the collective prayer of the monks, as seen in Bawit in Middle Egypt. It is interesting to note that in the case of the two oratories in Bawit, the monks apparently also prayed next to each other. A small prayer niche flanked by columns served as a point of orientation without each worshipper being able to look towards the niche. Since the first Muslim mihrabs are not attested until 710, long after the conquest of Syria and North Africa, they were probably not an Arab invention, but rather a reaction to Judeo-Christian practices. The minbar, here an example from the atrium of Saqqara Monastery, to the left, it's also thought to have been originated from Christian outside pulpits. Finally, if we look at the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, the first major Islamic building in the territory of the antique empire, we are surprised by the extent to which its architect translated the functional scheme of a mosque into the techniques and the vocabulary of Syrian church architecture. Instead of a hypostyle hall with brick columns, as probably existed in Kufa and is documented later in Samarra, he realized the prayer hall as a transverse basilica with wide-spanned arcades, which instead of a dense forest of columns, allowed for a unified spatial impression, interrupted only by a few columns or supports and wide open walls, transversal walls. This type of extremely light and transparent architecture was particularly prevalent in the church architecture of the North Syrian limestone massif, where the stone material offered excellent conditions for precisely cut, elegant and wide-span arched architecture. In particular, the arcades in the mosque's atrium achieve an elegance with their slender horseshoe arches above the imposed capitals that points to an important major church in Syria as possible model. It is one of the special paradoxes of architectural history that this motif, that was very common in church architecture in late antiquity, particularly in Syria, should only one generation later become an identity-forming motif of Islamic architecture. As this Quranic manuscript von Sana'a shows, long sequences of columned arcades and porticos had already become a symbol of Islamic architecture by 700. In Anjar, Walid's new city in the Bekaa Valley, today Lebanon, such arcades along the streets and in the palaces became an expression of a new lightness with which the Caliph tried to surpass the Hellenistic ideal cities of late antique Syria with the heavy, old-fashioned columned streets, the Kardi. Since the city was designed primarily for the Caliph's officials and military, I think it's not inconceivable that the new elegance and lightness of this arch architecture also had an ethnic component, as the architecture of a new elite that brought a different lifestyle and cultural identity to Syria along with their new faith. Finally, back to Damascus. As Alan George made clear in his most recent monograph on the mosque, later contemporaries could only explain the rich mosaic decoration of the Umayyad mosque through an intervention by Emperor Justinian II, since it was not conceivable as an Islamic art genre. However, Syria was itself an important center of glass and mosaic production in late antiquity, so there would have been no need to import Byzantine art. Rather, the mosaics found in the bathhouse of the Caliph's residence in Kirbet Mafia near Jericho a generation later suggest that the Caliphs also employed their own mosaicists, and that this tradition was maintained from the Samara Mosque to Cordoba in Spain during the time of Rahman III. The legend of the mosaicist coming from Byzantium, which was only handed down in later times, suggests, however, that in the multi-religious societies of the post-antique Middle East, artistic techniques were increasingly assigned to the different religious groups. It was not so much the building and its specific spatial forms as certain materials, techniques, and ornamental forms that determined religious aesthetics more and more. This is evident not only in the reception of the great mosque of Cordoba, in the architecture of immigrants, Mozarabic immigrants of the 10th and 11th century, but also in the example of Santa Maria la Blanca in Toledo. Built in the 12th century as a synagogue on the rather atypical ground plan of a mosque and later converted into a church, the building is defined less by type, function, or religion-specific spatial configurations of rooms, than by a specific repertoire of art techniques, of materials, and decorative patterns. Religious identity is less recognizable here through the type of the building than through a culture and religion-specific aesthetic that is passed down through the generations of artisans and is highly charged with meaning. This identification of religious groups by means of a repertoire of typical materials and styles was to become increasingly important for minorities such as early modern Judaism until the 19th century. Finally, it served historicism as a convenient religious label in hundreds of synagogues where the precisely chosen historical style is much more important than the almost arbitrarily varying spatial forms and models. But this is a new chapter in the eventful history of mosque, church, and synagogue that requires further research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Luchterhahn. We can take one question. No? Okay, maybe think of a question until the discussion at the end of the session. And thank you again. I would like to present our next speaker, Dr. Iona Rapzi, from the EPSL, and who will present to us the church behind the mosque, early photographs from the Ottoman Empire.
Thank you, Fatima, for the introduction. I'm sorry, I will read from my screen. I hope it will be legible. Let me first thank all of you for being here, and especially Sabine Fromel, who over the last 10 years has been involving me to her different, very stimulating research programs. And I followed this one since the beginning. I'm very grateful to her for her kindness and for her interest in my work. Today I will not speak about my very personal field of expertise, which is Armenian art, but I will need to find my PowerPoint, sorry. I sent it yesterday, I hope. So I work at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, but I am also responsible for the photographic and graphic arts collection of this institution, Byzantine and Christian collection, from which I will present you some material today. Through this paper, I will try to shed some light to the complex relation between the architectural typologies of monotheistic shrines and through the point of view of early photography, from photography of the 19th and early 20th century. And I'm really sorry that I have missed the first day of the conference. I understood how stimulating it was over lunch. And Christian collection of which is also known as Gabriel Millet Byzantine and Christian collection. What I missed in my PowerPoint is that a small part of the collection, but very, very interesting with much Egyptian Coptic material, is online, a digital library of SL University. It is very easy, Bibnoma digital library, and perhaps Millet, and you reach about 5,000 digitized pictures of the 19th century and the early 20th. Unlike what the collection's name tells, collection chrétienne et byzantine, Byzantine and Christian, Islamic art is present in various ways in this collection. I will not propose an overview of this material, but I picked up some case studies where churches and mosques have alternated on the same site, or they have occupied, invested neighbor places, as in the city of Thessaloniki, of which you have a view here. The building is by the talented architect Marcel Le Tourneau in the first decade of the 20th century, with a very special sensitivity to the Turkish and Sephardic urban environment of the building. This interesting, the photograph helped us to understand hints with the issue of landscape raised earlier by Mustafa Tüpev. The photographs of Marcel Le Tourneau, who was trained as an architect, were intended to be the source for plans and elevations for the survey of Byzantine churches of the city, which was eventually published. The church of Saint Sophia, not the one of Constantinople, this of Thessaloniki, had replaced an early basilica in the 7th century, and was, since the 15th century, at the moment it was photographed, a mosque. But still it preserved, before its western facade, you can see it in the front, the Cistercian portico, which was a remnant from the short Latin rule over the city in the late 12th century. Many photographic images like this one record forgotten views of monuments which have radically changed since that by modern restorations, which often attempted to make the building fit to actual cultural and religious stereotypes. Photographs are also valuable records of archaeoscapes and cityscapes of the past. Moreover, their analysis may help us to understand whether and how the visual resources have informed scholars' approaches and scholars' views. Until very recently, our knowledge of buildings relied especially on the photographic and published material before the era of Google Earth or the easy travel, which has changed the life of all of us. About the collection, a few words. Gabriel Millet, the founder, who put up this collection, was the first French academic who dedicated himself to the study of the art of the Byzantine world in France. Byzantine art was at his time, late 19th, early 20th century, at that time was being discovered and was shaped as a field throughout the scholar's career. Millet, whose career culminated at the Académie of Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres, the most highest distinctions in the French academia. Millet can be considered as the true founder of history of Byzantine art in France. His pioneer work, like that of Émile Malle for the medieval West, has nourished generations of historians of this field. Millet started, however, his career as a member of the French school at Athens as a classicist and practiced himself photography, which was not only a tool, but a modern technology, which was slowly becoming an archaeological tool. It was very innovative and not very trustful at his beginnings. The collection he built was meant to function to provide a database for the study and teaching, mainly with photographs, but also, as you can see around the room, a few humble graphic arts, watercolors, and a few humble archaeological objects and ivory casts, which were displayed in what Millet called a small Byzantine museum. The classification of the material reveals the encyclopedic approach of the scholar and his knowledge of the methods and value of photography. Since the beginnings, Millet, and you have here the first page of two out of 101 photographic albums, which are in themselves, by themselves, interesting photographic objects. Since the beginning, Millet worked to bring together views of the monuments of the Byzantine world beyond his own field of expertise, that was Greece and the Balkans. He worked with professional photographers at different places, and he also acquired by different means, and thanks to his network, photographic prints from the most famous names and brands of his time, such as the Istanbul Abdullah brothers, Sibaye Joaillier, again is from Istanbul, Dmitry Ermakov, the famous Tbilisi photographer, or the Alinari house in Italy. The broad scope of the collection meets the scope of the scholar, who tried in his Iconographie des Évangiles and the Greek school and Byzantine architecture, tried to provide an overview and an overall theoretical scheme for the evolution of the two major fields of Byzantine art, architecture and iconography. However, the discovery of Byzantine art ironically merged at that time with the destiny of the Ottoman Empire, in which Byzantine lands was largely included, as Greece and the Balkan Peninsula. The frontiers were very different from the modern Greek state. And at that time, the Ottoman Empire extended to the Holy Land and Egypt, very important and targeted places for the Western and colonial powers. The Ottoman Empire the Ottoman Empire hosted the remains of various eras. These archaeological remains were piled up in the lands of the Ottoman Empire, and it was suitable for archaeological investigation and adventures, but also a pathway to dreamlike vestiges from the past, Orientalism, that travel accounts and photography disseminated through various tones. The integration of the Byzantine past into the visual environment of the Ottoman present, different photographic shots, though it is very little discussed until now. Millet started his fieldwork at Trebizond territory when he was a member at the French school at Athens. Perhaps this was his own survey in Ottoman. His objective, his aim, was the study of the history of Christian buildings of the city, and this is very important, he is the first archaeologist and the first art historian to explore Trebizond before the expulsion of the Christian populations between 1912 and 1922. And he was followed only by a short Russian expedition. When Trebizond was explored in the 20th century, it was after the departure of the population and major changes in the cityscape. Millet published the two studies we saw before. Millet published a corpus of Greek inscriptions and a catalogue of Byzantine monuments from Trebizond, which reveal his background in classics. Without spending much time on the Islamic monuments that he photographed, he wandered around the different Christian traditions that intersected in the city, and he was not very curious about the Ottoman context of the buildings. The Church of St. John the Theologian, here is the Greek cathedral turned into a mosque that he examined, although it was a mosque, as a Greek church. This is the St. John the Theologian that he studies again as a Byzantine church, and providing the record of the Ottoman monument, Mumkhane, which was ironically a victim of the modernization of the city. It was demolished when the Christians left. Millet worked extensively in the Peloponnese, which preserved at his time Islamic vestiges of the conversion of churches, and here is a modern photograph, in a very interesting building, St. Sophia, very little known, although it is very impressive, St. Sophia in Monemvasia, where Millet worked. He knew it well, but he almost ignored the mihrab, that we can notice here, and which is quite valued by restoration. Fieldwork in Islamic lands was limited. It is not clear whether this was his choice or imposed by the circumstances. Thessaloniki, an Ottoman city, when in a great part of his work in Greece, has a particular appearance by the diversity of the population and the ambition for modern economic and urban development, which was reflected by the photographers and the travelers. Although the aim was to to record the Byzantine remains, the photographs of the churches in their as mosques testify to a stage of their afterlife, the afterlife of the churches, and the life of the mosques, which has definitely vanished. The same applies to the dome of one of the most famous and disputed monuments about its date, the Rotunda St. George of Thessaloniki, which was a Roman mausoleum, and you see here as a Muslim building, where covered entirely in the interior, covered by plaster and painted with an arabesque which matches the ancient medallion in mosaic and provides a good example of this shared or several layers in the life of monuments. Millet did not produce a monographic study on the churches of Thessaloniki, and in his Greek school of Byzantine architecture, he deplores not being able to verify the devices that shape the vaults hidden under the white plaster of the churches, an analysis which was necessary for his overall history. However, these records, which are not published because are not clear enough for the Byzantine building and unclear and irrelevant to Ottoman architecture, are very valuable to understand the transition and the multiple lives of things and artifacts and buildings. A similar similar observation can be done for these three liturgical objects. It's more anecdotic here, I know, where you see a sense very the dragon among the curiosities that Millet has seen and photographed perhaps in Mount Athos. The scholar shares the major question of his time, Orient au Darom. Byzantine art encompasses the deep fault between East and West, and he has the concern to reply what in Byzantium is Eastern and what is Western or Roman. For him it appears, and rightly, that there was no a single border, and in Byzantine architecture, Eastern and Roman traditions were mingling, but how? In his book on iconography, he rejects the barbarian look of the figures of the Syriac manuscripts. Instead, in the Greek school, his taste in painting is Roman, Hellenistic, classical, academic. Instead, in his Greek school, he transposes the dilemma as Orient and Byzantium, and he considers Christians and Muslims traditions are exemplified by the antagonism or the divide, if you want, between two shared techniques, stone and brick. These techniques, according to him, do not correspond to the religious use of the buildings, but are considered as regional trends. Syria, in this respect, and I quote, builds with raw joints in an ancient way, even the mosques. End of quote. Syria was a noble reference, and the knowledge of the monuments of the Near East was something beyond his own work due to the Orientalists in vogue at that time. Millet knew himself Gertrude Bell, and he had read the works of Auguste Choisy and Melchior de Vogueux, the first explorers of the Near East. From time to time, he notes, he remarks, observes affinities in construction techniques and gladly compares Christian and Islamic buildings. The lessons of the masons of the Serbian king Milutin that he notes in the Greek school are found in the work of the Serbian successors of Milutin in the 14th and 15th century Balkans, as here at Ljubuten, and later the Turks were trained at their school. Later, in ancient Serbian art, Millet writes about origins and influences according to terms dear to the time. He recognizes the work of the Serbian masons in the baths, caravanserais, and tombs for Muslim commissioners, as for example here at Korsom Lehan, another interesting monument vanished near in the outskirts of Skopje. These photographic documents illustrate Millet's attention to buildings, to the construction and ornamentation of facades, supporting elements and walls. The observation of these elements reinforced the recognition of artists and craftsmen in the service of the invader, as he says, that which applied decorative devices from Islam in that time, but they bear comparison with both as well with Byzantine Renaissance. The arts of Islam, nevertheless, are less present in his work, but very much present in the photo archive, and this makes them precious. Byzantinists know Guillaume de Gerfagnon, and perhaps a broader audience, the explorer of a new province of Byzantine art, Cappadocia. But they know very little, or they tend to ignore, that during his year as a Jesuit teacher in Turkey, Guillaume de Gerfagnon produced invaluable records of the topography of medieval cities such as Tokat or Sivas or Amasya and their Seljuk monuments. The encyclopedic approach which governs the collection has provided an unsuspected testimony to the parallel discovery of Christian and Islamic heritage in the Middle East, while the donation from the Imperial Orthodox Palestine Society of Palestine represents a particularly valuable contribution. And this is also accidental. It is the Mosque of Sofia turned into a museum. And this is my third point about Orientalism and archaeology. Since the very first steps of Christian archaeology and Byzantine art history, the East or the Orient was considered as an unquestionable source or even as a matrix for shapes, structural shapes, and decorative devices. Millet was contemporary to the problematic figure of Józef Strzygowski, and he was a fervent supporter of his work, more likely because of their common interest on the East than for ideological and political affinities. Millet was sensitive on his time's dilemma, Orient or Rome, and shared the obsessional search for the origins that moved the positivistic scholarship of all the intellectuals of that time. Millet's network supplied the collection with views of landscapes and monuments, as we have seen, and were seminal to European art. Support was provided by the Ministry of Education and personalities such Gustave Mendel, Léonce de Bélier, but I don't want to get very long. Millet, in his fieldwork at Athos, met Nikodim Kondakov, the father of Russian Byzantine art history. They exchanged extensively, and their correspondence has been published. They also, and letters, but they also exchanged books and particularly photographs. Kondakov was the leader of the Orthodox Society for Palestine, the archaeological society which tried to colonize through an archaeological point of view the Holy Land for the sake of the Russian Empire. The society was very, very active and produced lots of journals, periodicals, narratives to provide to the Russian Empire Christian roots in the cradle of Christianity and the Holy Land. The prints from the society are obviously, that we have in the collection, are the input of the cooperation between Kondakov and Millet. 3 albums of prints offer a valuable tour through all the major shrines of the Holy Land. You have here an example from Sinai. The focus is on the origins of the Christian art that Russians and Western scholars sought at that time for different reasons and purposes. This photographic at the same time a fully modern methodology, relying on networks of influence, technological innovation, photography itself, print, travel, steamer, and massive or serial production of images for their dissemination. In 1881, Kondakov published in Odessa, in Russian, his Voyage au Sinaï. Only the title was in French. The raw material of this publication was reproduced in prints and transparencies 1 year earlier for Millet. The captions of the plates are published in French translation after the Russian text published by Kondakov, which was written earlier, obviously. Among the pictures, the close-up of the 2 towers, the bell tower and the minaret, taken from the walls of Sinai, highlights the coexistence of the 2 faiths in the monastery, while suggesting the strength of the Orthodox expansion, the Russian Orthodox expansion, materialized by the construction of the Church of the Transfiguration in 1871 and the bell tower built by the Russians, built under Russian patronage. This picture has been taken before the Kondakov trip on Sinai by the Count Stevastianov, another Russian precursor of Christian archaeology, and shows the complex without the clock tower built by the Russians and with only the minaret standing out from the compound. This unique testimony about the parallel cults in this major shrine, major monotheistic shrine dedicated later to St. Catherine, is not the only one that goes beyond the interest in Christian vestiges. Archaeology goes hand in hand with ethnography and the quest of realities of the Bible, which nurtured religious science in a positivist era, is visible in a series of pictures showing Bedouins, produced also by the Russian society. The Bedouins are grouped together by men and women and feed this encyclopedic overview of the holy place of the desert, with vibrant spirituality and stimulating imagination. The lens of the photographers of the Russian society caught the entanglement of faiths and places as it developed across time in the Near East. A series produced for the society showed the major shrines of the Holy Land in their almost actual topography and preservation. They staged them settling humans in local or military attire. The presence of humans sets the measurement for the composition and at the same time operates as a marker of authority. The temple esplanade is shown perhaps purposefully with an austere void dominating the landscape of the holy city. All the same, pictures such as this one, Bethlehem, show the buildings in their prominence before they were invaded by the expanding urban fabric. In Millet's publications, these photos were not picked up, and the monuments have received rather little attention. Instead, however, Syria has been acknowledged several times as the matrix and the inspiration of all later Byzantine architecture. Millet, yes, I told that, the absence from the discussion of the Great Mosque of Damascus, of which we have just heard from Millet's work, is quite puzzling, even surprising, given the importance of the material, and the attention it received in the photographs from the Russians. In some of the pictures, we see the vibrant surroundings of the mosque, which was replaced the church. Some of these photos are less appropriate, perhaps, for academic studies. And here, some of these photos were perhaps less appropriate for academic studies. However, the shrine with the relics of St. John the Baptist, as you can see here in the, and it is commented, is of cardinal importance for the transition from the Byzantine to the Islamic period and for the appropriation of the Christian and Byzantine memory. Apart these photographs, the collection holds some watercolor drawings which were copied after the original copies of the mosaics produced by the Russian society, and this is quite important, before the fire that destroyed in the late 19th century the Great Mosque, and after which the building was again restored. These pictures do not have really the charm of ruins, but they show monuments anchored in the public space and and moments of daily life around them, which they convey a secular memory, however sometimes picturesque. The photos are valuable for the status of the monuments and the urban landscapes, and their interest is both documentary and historiographic. As with the landscapes of Sinai, the pictures, and this is another one which is very interesting, how confusing the image is between the mosque and the church, and how actually similar the devices are in late antique architecture. The photos of Istanbul were barely used in publications, but nevertheless, they emphasize the Oriental depth, the Oriental input of Byzantine art, and the importance of this Eastern tradition in art and Christian iconography. Beyond the labels, independently from the labels, Byzantine, Christian, and Islamic, the Gabriel Millet collection constitutes an unexpected contribution of Byzantine archaeology to Islamic heritage. Although relatively thin, this material offers insights into the parallel historiography of the two disciplines of art, Byzantine art history and Islamic art history, whose emergence took place at the same time and whose emergence combines the fascination for the Orient and the modernity of photography. It is the very notion of heritage that is, which is enriched through the lens as a testimony to artistic and religious value of the buildings, that comes out from this presentation that I wanted to show and share. A heritage which is fragile, venerable, contested, and it is, I think, worth looking again through these photographs to these sensitive markers of identity and imagination. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iona, for your presentation. And thank you for pointing out that archaeology and ethnography go together. Thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Abir Khalil, please. Quickly, we move on to our last presentation. by Dr. Abir Khalil. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Dr. Abir Khalil from the Suez Canal University, who came especially from Ismailia today, will speak about architectural and decorative motifs exchange between mosque and church in Cairo in the Mamluk era. Please welcome Dr. Abir. مش موجودة.
Good afternoon. Our topic today is about architectural and decorative motif exchange between mosque and church in Cairo in Mamluk era. At the beginning, our presentation have a number of items. Introduction about the relationship between Coptic art and Islamic art, also the objective. The third items about the Egyptian roots for both of mosque and the church, foundation and shape, architecture elements, decorative motifs, then conclusion. Since its inception, the architecture of mosque in the Islamic Egypt has been influenced. Okay. Since its inception, the architecture of mosques in Islamic Egypt has been influenced by several local factors, including inherited architectural traditions, environmental elements that affected materials and design, and inherited cultures which influence the nature of the composition and formation of architecture. The fabric of Egyptian people, Muslims and Christians, share the land, culture, civilization, and heritage, which led to the existence of number of mutual influence between both of Islamic and Coptic civilization, reflecting the spirit of tolerance and harmony between the Egyptian people during different Islamic eras. The relationship between Islamic art and Coptic art is a unique relationship, which in turn allowed for the existence of many mutual influences and overlap in their basic features. As the Copts were influenced by Muslims in using the main elements of Islamic decoration, which were represented in geometric shape and planet decoration, in addition to use Arabic calligraphy and inscriptions alongside Coptic writings to decorate artistic and architectural elements, icons, and Coptic manuscripts. This led to the overlap and intertwining between the elements and characteristics of both Islamic and Coptic arts, leading to the repetition and similarity of many artistic elements and tools used within Christian and Islamic places of worship alike. Specifically, in the Mamluk era, Egyptian religious architecture was characterized by its local character, having its own distinct features that set it apart from other Islamic provinces. Ancient Egyptian represented the most important civilization of the Mediterranean culture in the ancient world, and its architecture had significant impact on religious architecture throughout its history. Therefore, these papers aim to study the origins and evaluation of the architectural typologists' progress through the interaction between mosque and church architecture and inherited local culture. If we say about the function and shape, architecture of both mosque and church developed with the development of the society that produced each of them, so exchange of architectural elements, components, and decorative motifs was common between each of them. Among the most important architectural elements and components that were exchanged between mosque and church are the columns, niches, domes, towers, and planning facilities, as well as the decorative elements used that the artist employed in the architecture of both the mosque and the church, perhaps the most important of which is the star pattern. The artist employed it according to the culture of the building, whether it was a mosque or a church. If we talk about architectural elements, we can say that among the most important architectural elements and components that were exchanged between mosque and church are columns, niches, domes, ceiling, towers in church, minarets in mosque, pulpit, preacher stand, member, and emblem, holy book holder, Quran chair in mosque, also mangaleya in the church, arches, screens, then facilities such as residence and libraries. About the first elements column, we found the same shape of the entrance of Al-Mosque Al-Hagib mosque, the same one in the hanging church. The most of column had taken from ancient Egyptian temples. The second items, niches. Niches had used usually to define praying direction. We found in this example that the shape and the usage of niches was common in church and mosque. The third element is domes. Domes had used usually to cover sacred and important areas. The sample here from the Ashraf Khalil dome, also the comparison between Wadi and Natron Monastery. Ceiling, wooden ceiling used in both of mosque and church, whatever basic ceiling or bomb ceiling. Another architecture element, towers and minarets. Minarets, the place of the call to prayer. Tower, it is considered a feature sign of the church and was used to call believers to prayer as the bell ring, alerting believers to the beginning and the end of rituals. Its bell also ring on holidays and occasion of sorrow. Both of them makes it easy for people to know the religious origin from others and identify it easily. This sample from Al-Mansur Qalawun, the minaret of Al-Mansur Qalawun Mosque, the same shape from Saint Catherine, the minaret, the tower of Saint Catherine. Another architecture element is pulpit, preacher stand, member in mosque, amble in church. Member, it is brightness that khatib or the preacher in the mosque and other religious facilities elevate it, so that those present can hear or watch the standing on it. Amble, a high place on which the priest climb to preach the people. We have a sample from Mosque of Sultan Hassan, member of Sultan Hassan, also emblem from hanging church. Another architectural element, holy book stand, Quran chair or mangaleya. Both of them have great importance in the Coptic and Islamic civilization because of their close association with reading and reciting the heavenly book. They are placed in the most important places within the religious facilities, where the sickle is placed in front of the door of the main structures, while the Quran chair is placed in the Qibla Iwan. Geometric decoration were widely used in both the sickle and Quran chair, especially the star plate. We have a sample from Mangalia, Saved Civilization Museum. Also another one from the Mosque of Sultan Hassan. Another architecture element, arches. Arches found at mosques and churches, which used semicircle arches, horseshoe arches, pointed arches. We have example from Zahir Baber's mosque, a pointed arch, also the same shape from Abu Sifain church. Screens. In order to block the worshippers and students in their walks in mosque and monks in the church to provide a kind of calm and privacy in the place where it is closed. We see here the screens from Tambogh al-Mardani, the mosque of Tambogh al-Mardani. Another one is from Sid Barbara Church. If we go to the facilities, we can find the library at mosque and church, the same design and the same purpose. Another facilities, residence, which call Khalawi in mosque, also Qalaya in church. We have example from Khalawi in Farag ibn Bar'u Khanqa. Another one from St. Macarius Ministry in Buhira Governorate. If we go to decorative motifs, as well as the decorative elements used that the artistic employed in the architecture of both the mosque and the church, perhaps the most important of which is the Thar pattern. The artist employed it according to the culture of the building, whether it was mosque or a church. We have a sample from star pattern, Sultan Hassan Mosque, also the same pattern from Hanging Church. Also calligraphy, Arabic calligraphy. There is a Coptic inscription from Madrasa of Nasir Muhammad. The same one, also Coptic inscription from Hanging Church. Also used the planet motifs. We can see the artist used the shape of grapes, decorated door of Al-Hakim Mosque. Also the same decoration at the church of Sid Barbara. Conclusion. Finally, this paper accounts some common elements between mosque and the church according to the needs and rule of this architecture. The Mamluk Sultan patronage of Christian architecture varied according to period of tolerance and persecution, especially during the reign of Qalawun dynasty. Mamluk sultans allowed the renovation works in Christian architectures in times of tolerance to achieve a kind of satisfaction and safe home front during Crusaders' attack on the north coasts of Mamluki. Some of these renovation works were under Mamluki Sultan's patronage, and the other at the need of each Christian architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abir, and thank you to all our speakers of this session. I would like to open the discussion. Questions, comments?
Yes, I have some questions to Professor Luchterhand. Thank you so much for this paper, because it is really in the heart of our reflections. Now you underlined the important role of multi-religiosity in the last antique period, and yes, there were so much exchange, interactions, and juxtapositions and stratification. So a converted Muslim could belong to a family which conserved Christian rites, and there was not really, if I understood in the right way, really a research of identity. It was normal to share so much things. And when identity became a main theme, it was linked to power. It was linked to the superiority of some social groups. The question I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions, but there were 3 points I found highly interesting. The problem of the Dome of the Rocks. That is highly exciting, that they built a monument, really a dominating monument, without any precise function. Is this a unique case of such a rhetorical behavior? What was the sense of this? To attract attention to something, to convince believers perhaps to change, or what is this? The second question is, in late antiquity or in antiquity, we have an important link between sacred building and pagan buildings, so sacred architecture and dwellings and houses. Can one observe this also in the transitory period, which you showed us in your paper? And the last question, yes, I have so much questions, but it's enough, is a question of decoration. So when a church had been used temporarily as a mosque, what happened? Did one fix some other inscriptions or to make sure that is another liturgical ceremonial, it's another region, or was it only a problem of architecture?
Thank you very much. To start with the third question, the decoration is in many cases lost, but we have some information when they used the apse of the triconch of Bethlehem, the south apse, and there is recorded that they found Quranic scripture inside the apse. Maybe this was repainted later. There's a source that the Muslims write their words inside the apse of the Bethlehem church. That could be done in many cases, not only on the floors, changed also on the walls, maybe also the textiles they use with crosses or not can be changed when the use of the building changed. Late antique pagan is very difficult. There's an exchange between formal repertoire of mosques and also pagan or military secular architecture. I think more in the Iraq architecture, the brick architecture. I'm not expert of this. I'm Western art historian. In the late antique Mediterranean, near to the coasts of the Mediterranean, the repertoire of religious forms was well established from the 4th century in demarcation of the pagan basilicas, and which I don't know if they existed anymore. I can think about it, but in this point I'm skeptical to find new things in the 7th century. The most of the pagan or the secular architecture is lost after the 5th, 6th century, and the lifestyle changes more, and more continuously than the religion changes. So the tradition in the secular world has a shorter life, all traditions of everyday life. But this may be a question we have to face the next time. Dome of the Rock, yes, that's a big problem. Oleg Kraba has posted up. There's this inscription refers to the role of Jesus, who is not the son but only a prophet. There's a declaration maybe against the anastasis. This could be an anti-monument maybe to mark a superiority in front of the tradition of the anastasis. It's a competition of, I think the most important point, the tradition of Muhammad is really late, although the Muslims sometimes try to redate it to the 7th, 8th century. It could be an attempt to occupy this important site with a monument of your own face, to when you put something on your table to say that's my place, a visible sign of occupation of this site, so that no other religion can reinterpret it in their own interest. It's maybe a defensive sign also. This is only a possibility. The rest I would let up more to the specialist of Islamic architecture, which I'm not, to be open in this. Have I forgotten something? With the minbar, I'm not sure. Maybe this is a very common instrument for certain occasions. Maybe it existed also for secular proclamations, that they used it on the market, or for other reasons could be a wooden instrument. That's maybe possible. The mihrab, yeah. The first attested mihrab begins in the time of the Umayyads in the Mediterranean area, not in the Arab. But there was also Christian architecture already in Medina and Mecca. The Christianity spread all over until Yemen. They could have known in there, but the apse in this type, we have older apses in the Kaiserkult Rome of Luxor. It's 4th century. We have also apses in the early synagogues of Dura Opus, but all these monuments had no more importance in the 6th, 7th century. I think the use in monasteries is important because the monasticism played a big role as contact group to the foreign religion. There's a legend that Muhammad got his new face in contact with an Nestorian monk. This legend is very old. It's, I think, a 7th or 8th century. So there were much more than the bishops, the monks, and the monasticism was a very important social factor in the Eastern Church, in the Coptic Church until today, but also in the Syriac. So this possibility that this common prayer before a niche was known before Islamic times, for me it's not very far-fetched to assume it, but we can't improve this. There may be different sources also.
More questions? Okay. More questions? No? Comments? No? Anna?
Did you spoke about the grotto of Bethlehem? about Arabic inscriptions just right now, or no? Because I did just catch it like that, but I was not sure. In the Bethlehem, you took the example of Bethlehem. No. You meant, yeah, about the inscription, about the Arabic inscriptions of Bethlehem, that's right? Yeah, I wanted just to tell that those inscriptions made in Kufic and in Arabic are not made by Muslim. The inscription was made by Christian pilgrims, Arabic-speaking Christian pilgrims. So it's a little bit different. But we have another example of this change of identity that we saw in one of your pictures, I think, in Greece. It was really interesting to see the mihrab, and next there are some icons or paintings. So this question of change of the building is really interesting, and I think we also saw that yesterday in
Yesterday, yes,
in St.
several
Sophia.
papers.
Yeah,
yes.
St. Paper and St. Sophia especially, as we
Yeah.
have this archangel in the dome, and that this aspect of sorry, this aspect of the change of identity and of the use of decor of Christians or Muslim is really interesting. But we can see that they use it. The Muslim too used the Christian painting because they didn't delete it. So they were. Yeah. Okay, for this case it was plastered, but
Yes.
in St. Sophia we saw that they are still
Yes.
present and they are still using it as decor, real decor. But I think
Yeah, since you raised the point of inscriptions, Arabic inscriptions by Christians in this, I think this is also found in Egypt in different. You can confirm or not in different monuments.
yeah. So as graffiti we can find a lot, but I was asking also about the.
How to distinguish Christian inscriptions by Arabic inscriptions? Because Arabic was not yet the Christian language at this time.
No.
In this,
Yeah, it's really
we
difficult.
have no Arabic Bible in this time. Only find names.
Yeah, I think there was an Arabic Bible from this time, because from the 10th century we have.
Yeah, this is later tradition. From the 9th century we have a lot of translations.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really not easy. It was the topic of my PhD to try to define the inscription, the Christian inscription next there. Yeah, the names, especially in the first times, names were also from the traditional Arabic repertory, so it's not easy, but we have some invocations specific to Christian, and okay, I made the beginning of the differentiation of repertory with a small corpus, and we had a lot of crosses, and it was really easy to say, okay, here we have a corpus of Arabic inscription, Christian Arabic inscription, and then I studied it. And so, مثلا, if you have, for example, the Hati, the sinner, it could be a mark of Christian Arabic speaker. And in those places like Bethlehem, we have a lot of sinners. But this is a specific term in Arabic, okay? So we can say, okay, it was not maybe Muslim, but maybe Christian.
It was also in Coptic.
And also in Coptic.
Identified themselves as the humble,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
sinner.
We have also the sinner in Arabic, but this is another term. They use another term. For the Muslim, they use another term. So we have some.
This use of verbs, if I remember, is attested by Eutychius from Alexandria. But if an Arab goes into this church of Bethlehem and the South Alps and to write something, he wouldn't write a praise of Muhammad. He wouldn't write a praise of the person who is in the basilica, the Christian tradition. It's not, from the outside, not easy to define if this person who writes it in favor of Christianity is a real Christian in our sense, or is he a real other? Or we could be an Arabic favorite or interested in Christianity, like Muawiyah, who prayed. This is, I think, from our distant point as historians, it's not possible to define the identity of
Yeah.
this person, if this identity is really
Yeah,
cleared.
sometimes it's not easy, but sometimes we have just
Sometimes it
we
may
have some
be,
invocation to the Christ or to something really Christian, and it's okay. We say it's not possible to
but
be.
when
something
Arabs went to the preacher, Christian preacher Theodotus, they learned also the Christian thinking. Also, this is a mixed world, very, very difficult to reconstruct an identity for me as an historian.
So which word specifically are you referring to? Like, is there a specific word? I mean, there is a. If it's an inscription, it is a readable inscription, and if it has a certain meaning, it is either gonna refer to Muslim theology or Christian theology. It's gonna be one or the other. Now there are a little bit.
It's not that clear because sometimes you can find, in principle, a Muslim formula used by Christians in a Christian context. This is
Sorry, you can find a Muslim what? A Muslim?
a Muslim invocation, Baraka, Bismillah. These formulas
Okay.
employ blessings, employed by Christians
But these
in
are
churches.
these are also not just simply Muslim or Christian. Sometimes
No,
they
that-
predate the Muslim.
They're
just
Muslim in
Arabic.
principle,
For
but
example, the word baraka. Let's
Yeah,
say.
it's-
So let's say, but that's like a very
Yeah.
common term. It's not specifically religious.
now, we have inscriptions in the Iberian Peninsula invoking the name of Allah directly. So, but not Allah, but by God, because it's an Arab-speaking Christian talking about. It's very complicated, very complex, but it's with these inscriptions. You have this in Toledo. Up until the 14th century, there was a huge Christian Arab-speaking population. So, and they in the churches, there in the churches, you can find a lot of, well, not a lot, but we know that there were a lot of inscriptions in the churches, and specifically in the case of Mariam, which is a common figure of devotion in both religions, is much more complicated because, for example, in Jerusalem, in the Church of the Virgin, it's a mihrab carved just in the place where the tradition says it's the tomb of Miriam, and there's a mihrab to pray the Virgin
But
Mary.
even like the term mihrab is a little bit confusing in this context because the word mihrab exists in Judaism. Originally, it existed in Judaism. It meant the sanctum sanctorum. So whenever the priest went into the sanctum sanctorum, he went into the mihrab. And then the word also gets translated in the in Christianity, and then it's also referred to in the Muslim tradition. So when this priest went into the mihrab, even in the Jewish terminology, when they're talking about the Jewish religion,
I'm talking about the word. I'm talking about the actual physical
the
place
physical
called
mihrab,
mihrab,
which points
carved in the
towards
road.
the Kaaba, basically,
Yeah.
in the mosque. But the term itself
No, I know.
is a little bit fluid.
It's in Quran.
In that
It's in
respect.
Quran. It refers to the
I
temple.
I understand. There are like many different textual items that will exist between the various religions, and they are transferred from one to the other. For example, let's say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in the Arabic language, it was a terminology that was used in the Syriac language in the East, and it was said Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So it is like very close. These are closely related languages and closely related ideas about the existence of God. So you will find these texts that are similar and common between Christians and Muslims. They will both use them. But the question is how to identify, understand which one it belongs to in a certain time frame, in a certain context.
Yeah, I have another remark more. Zal 5 et 6, the rooms 5 and 6 of Bavit, excavated by Jean Maspero, you showed. The function of these rooms, there are a number of these longitudinal rooms in different monasteries, is still not completely clear. As you say, they might have been used as for community gatherings, because they have these long benches along the walls. They have this small niche in the east wall. But in room 6 was a huge number of graffiti found that showed that the people who wrote these were definitely not all monks. They were visitors from the outside. So they might have doubled as reception rooms. That is one of the theories about these long rooms. On the other hand, prayers, the daily prayers, the hours, could also be said in cells. They didn't need any specific rooms for that. There was no obligation to go to a joint prayer. But as you said, they might have been used for community gatherings and community prayers. They also had their private oratories, also with niches in the eastern wall. And the problem, especially with Bavit, it is a huge site, and only 5 to 10% maximum has been excavated yet. And the functions we know this monastery had, we know from papyri, it's very, very difficult to point out specific rooms for specific functions.
Yes, this theory is from Peter Grossman. I took it from him. He's very cautious about the function. I don't like the term function. Use is better for me. Sometimes you can use it, you mustn't use it. The room is not determined for function, but he's searching for an explanations, because the older cells are most smaller, the bigger cells are the later layers, also historical layer, and his explanation that could be a new form of common prayer. We know that the hours, also in Western Eastern Rite in the 5th, 6th century, the collective hours, daily hours, 8 times a day in this time are evolving as a ritual. This could be a space for using it, but it's not a function in a term of a church, which has a certain tradition with the function. This is more flexible, the use.
No, most of these buildings are multifunctional.
An image fixed in an apse is more determination than only a room who has nothing. I think this is not without any sense.
Rooms could be multifunctional. Churches were also multifunctional. A bishop's church could also be used for a tribunal, for example. The bishop presided over tribunals in his church. They could be used for meetings and gatherings. But these niches in Building 1, excavated by the most recent teams of the Louvre and the IFAO, which they identify as a hospitality building, you also have a niche like that in a room that was used for receiving guests. It is more, or it is not per definition of a sign that a space is meant for prayer or for a church. It has a definite liturgical relation, but you find it in rooms where you think, well, what in heaven is this? What could have been here? Because the shape is so strange.
It gives the room a certain religious meaning beyond any form of use. You have also niches with religious topics in late medieval hospitals. That's typical for hospital. Yeah. But in very many cases, the use of an image as a tool for reflection and contemplation is not far-fetched. I think.
No, it's not
You can't
far-fetched.
prove it.
It's also...
You can't prove it by archaeology. That's a question, this is sure.
Yeah, but for Bavit, as you say, multifunctionality of spaces is something that's definitely one of the things there, and I think in a lot of spaces, whether in monastic or the domestic environments.
I agree.
Yeah, questions, comments? No? Last chance. Okay, I think we can have the closing remarks by... Yeah. Anyone? Cinderella, please. Maybe the other one? Okay.
So I don't want to make conclusions. I think this will be very, very difficult because our discussion showed that it's really a very, very important research project. And I was very, very happy to see that there was a debate, a very, very open debate and very, very rich discussion. And now we will see. I underlined already in my little opening that a publication will happen in springtime of the next year. This will publication which goal is to largely open again the discussion, and our idea is again to go on with the seminars. We have 2 ideas for the next year, and I think it is very important to deepen these topics, and I'm really convinced that here in Cairo it was a very, very important step to do this. So we had really reflections, and I noted some topics, but there are so much topics really. One doesn't see how to construct now a new project, because there were so many topics and so many interesting topics. And I would really say thank you for all the contributions, because all the contributions were of a very high level. That is not always the case in international conference, but I think all the colleagues worked on the topic to prepare something of new, and which was very, very rich for our discussion. So certainly we talked much of exchange. That's a big word today, exchange. But we succeeded also to differentiate the word exchange or interaction in balanced exchange, in asymmetrical exchange. And we tried also to define the dynamism of such exchange. Exchange is linked to power. This is linked to ambitions of social classes. It is linked to superiority, also in the political way. And we thought a lot of examples of changes of architecture under the influence of a dominance, a political dominance. It was interesting to see what happened in Egypt under the influence of the Ottomans. It was also very, very interesting to analyze such a topic in the 19th and in the 20th century. And we could also observe we opened a very large chronological horizon that is always a little bit difficult. Because the risk is to be very, very superficial. But I think as for our project, we have to open a wide chronological horizon. Because what we saw this afternoon, the influence of last antiquity, the existence of a multi-religious society, the way in which things passed without any strong separation by such interactions, to use the same spaces, to have in the family members of different religious conviction and so on. This way to start the beginning of the definition, and there was still no problem of identity. Identity very, very slowly developed from these first moments, this first long moment of last antiquity, which is a very, very important moment for all the three monotheistic religions. And we spoke also of migration. How is it possible that a pattern or a typology or a form of the dome or a technique of construction can walk from one place to the other? Is this analogy? Is this that in different countries and different regions one felt a little bit the same necessity to change, to find, to define a new architectural language, new functions, or let's say use. I agree with this, but there was also, for me as a specialist of modern architecture in Europe, very interesting to see that such a phenomenon exists very, very, in a very, very early history of architecture. And we can understand this phenomenon only by analyzing the buildings, because I'm very, very afraid we will never find documents in which is written that such a craftsman walked or traveled from one point to another to explain in another context what is such a construction or what is such a pattern. But also the problem of the continuity. For me, this was very, very interesting to see, again, the centralized building, which was so important in Roman antiquity, also a little bit in Greece already. So important then in the Renaissance in Italy, and it was still so important in the architecture of today, like we could see in the case of French architecture and the constructions which had been planned at the end of the 19th and at the beginning of the 20th century. So this is also the identity. The identity is a famous word. Again, it's a very, very strong word today. The identity. What is identity? Identity is not really good defined terminology. Identity can change. Identity is a very, very relative thing. But the question of the identity here in our context is interesting, and so I'm very happy also about the conference of yesterday night, because we can learn much about this when we see how architects consider today the problem of identity. Is there really an image? What is a mosque, or what is a synagogue, or what is a church? Or is there the ambition to do it in a universal language? How is the behavior of patrons? Does patrons want that mosque has always the arcades and the dome and the minaret? So I think there is, and so I'm very, very happy that we integrated in our reflection the problem of today, of the construction of buildings, of churches, of synagogues, and of mosques. So the functions or the uses, certainly. This is also a fundamental problem. We talked a lot of buildings, and this was good. We talked also of decorations. This was always also good. We saw wonderful images. The question is a little bit the perception of decoration in the building. Huh? When you enter, what can you see? What is hidden? What is immediately visible? And all the hierarchy of the parcours inside of a building, as also the perception in the landscape or in a town. We talked a lot but in the inner space, and that's very important. Again, the space for the prayers, the space for the preacher, or in the churches, all these different functions or uses which provoked very, very important changes of the church. So of the typology. So I think it was very, very rich, and really I'm very, very happy that I could come here to Cairo. I hope also to come again. And I was very, very happy of all the papers which could discuss here. And I would also thank to Fatma Kesk. She did a marvelous organization, really. It was fantastic. The weather was fine. And I think we have a lot of very interesting topics to organize another meeting here or in another place. I would be very happy to do it.
Thank you so much, Sabine, for the closing remarks. I totally agree, of course. And thank you in the first place for inviting me to join you as a co-organizer for this wonderful conference. I learned a lot from each and every paper, and I think, as you say, this is just an opening for a series, I hope, I think every point that you raised can represent an independent little conference or workshop in the near future, I hope. I would like to end by thanking each of my colleagues from the IFAO, especially Sandrella, please. Sandrella, Namr Bahgat, Nada Girgis, Maha Yassin, Elaine Wahba, and of course the management of the IFAO, Pierre Taley and Abbas Zouash. And I thank all speakers and also all the audience who joined us over the 2 days in the lecture room and online. Thank you. We see you and we're happy you're here. And the whole conference is online. You can watch it and re-watch it on the YouTube channel of the IFAO. Thank you, everyone, and the reception at 7. Thank you. So you have free time until 7. Please join us in the garden at 7.